If your IFR Checkride is coming up, or you're just looking to bone up on your instrument knowledge, we've got a terrific resource for you at Flight Insight. This is our IFR Checkride at a Glance document. It's a 15-page PDF that you can get delivered to your inbox by following the link here or in the description and comments. It's also now an official part of our full Instrument Online Ground School, so students of that course have access to it through their course page. The way it's set up is designed to mirror the flow of the instrument oral or ground portion of the Checkride. Let's go through a little bit of the content, and I encourage you to grab and use it for your own studying. Now, when I run students through a mock IFR Checkride, I like to approach it as if we're examining a real instrument flight, so we'll progress in chronological order from beginning to end. That's how this document is set up. It begins with determining if the flight is legal for IFR, which is what page 1 deals with, and proceeds through pre-flight checks, departures, en route procedures, arrivals, and approaches. Let's have a closer look at GPS approaches and what the reference sheet says about them. Let's start with the basics. GPS, or GNSS to use a generic term, consists of a minimum of 24 satellites which are designed so that at least 5 of them are in view at all times from any point on Earth. We need 3 satellites at a minimum to get a latitude and longitude position, a point in 2-dimensional space. This is often called triangulation because it requires 3 satellites. To get latitude and longitude and altitude, a 3-dimensional fix, we need at least 4 satellites. GPS not only determines position, but by comparing positions over time, it can know both how fast we're traveling and on what course or track. Be aware that GPS can only compute ground speed and magnetic track. It can't tell us our airspeed or heading without some other external data source like the pitot-static system or the magnetic compass. Below this, we have the profile view of a typical GPS approach plate. In the minimum section, we see 4 rows with some perhaps familiar acronyms. GPS uses a slew of acronyms that can be confusing when introduced, as they all somewhat resemble each other and mean slightly different things. Over on the right, we can begin to define terms and acronyms. The first big one is RAIM, Receiver Autonomous Integrity Monitoring. We mentioned that 3 satellites are needed for our position on Earth and 4 for our position plus altitude. A 5th satellite is needed for integrity monitoring. This means that the 5th satellite acts as a check against the position and altitude reports of the other 4. If a fault is detected in the report from one of the satellites, it's excluded by your GPS receiver. Because we have a very accurate schedule of where satellites will be visible from, we can look up whether RAIM will or won't be available for a certain flight at a certain time, and if we need to rely on a different navigation source for IFR. Now most of us who fly IFR aren't so familiar with checking for RAIM availability. This is due more to modern GPS units being installed in aircraft. They have access to something called WAAS, the Wide Area Augmentation System. Instead of redundant satellites checking for signal integrity, ground stations with super accurate position information transmit to our receivers, giving us more precise position and altitude reports. The system is so precise that we can use it for both lateral and vertical guidance on an instrument approach, just like we do for a precision approach like ILS. And the kicker is that with a WAAS-enabled receiver, we don't need RAIM availability. Related to these forms of augmentation of GPS are various TSOs, or Technical Standard Orders. Whatever GPS unit you have in your aircraft will be certified under one of these TSOs. The first pair are C129 and C196. These are the unaugmented older units. They're able to be used for IFR flight, but because they don't benefit from WAAS, they can't be used when planning alternate airports, they can't perform some approaches with vertical guidance, and they require RAIM availability if they're going to be used for IFR at all. The newer TSO orders are C145 and C146, which we find more and more frequently these days. These are WAAS-enabled and can be used on approaches with vertical guidance and for alternate planning. So let's get into the acronyms we actually see on the approach plates. First up is LPV, Localizer Performance with Vertical Guidance. These are the most precise type of GPS approaches and involve both lateral and vertical guidance, just like on an ILS. They closely mirror a precision approach, but aren't precision approaches by the FAA's strict definition. LP is Localizer Performance. Again, this uses WAAS to compute a very precise lateral course like a localizer, but doesn't have a vertical component. They're flown like a non-precision localizer-only approach. LNAV plus V isn't a type of approach, it's still just an LNAV approach with non-precision minimums. But WAS-enabled GPS units are able to compute an advisory glide path to help plan a constant rate descent on final approach. An APV is an approach with vertical guidance. This would be our LPV approach, which is flown just like a precision approach, ending in a decision altitude. They're not strictly defined as precision approaches, so they can't be used as such in alternate planning. For example, you won't use the precision weather minimum required for an alternate, 600-foot ceilings and a 2-mile visibility, but the non-precision standard, 800-foot ceiling and 2-mile visibility. More and more we see this acronym RNP come up, meaning Required Navigational Performance. It's a standard that a GPS unit is held to. You'll see the RNP approach specification on many approach plates, which has a lateral accuracy of 1 nautical mile on the terminal phase, going down to 0.3 mile on final approach. This is the standard that most WAS-enabled GPS units are able to perform to. Now, here's what those standards look like. We start with the localizer performance course width, which is what we see on an LPV or LP approach. Beginning at the final approach fix, the width is 0.3 miles to either side of center. Down at the runway threshold, it narrows to 350 feet to either side, just like a localizer. Below that is the course width of an LNAV approach. It remains 0.3 miles from the FAF to the runway threshold and maintains that width in the missed approach segment. And here is a full course width of a so-called RNP1 GPS unit, the kind we're mostly working with. There are 3 phases: approach, which we've looked at, terminal, and en route. The en route phase occurs when the flight is more than 30 miles from its destination and departure airports. The course width is 2 miles to either side. Within 30 miles of the airport, the width shrinks down to 1 mile on either side, and we enter terminal mode. Approach mode begins as we arrive at the final approach fix, shrinking down to 0.3 miles on either side, and then continuing on depending on if we're on a localizer performance or lateral navigation type approach. So that's just one page of the study guide. The rest of our Checkride at a glance takes a similar flow. We go into what you need to know about your flight instruments, how to plan a flight and get a clearance, departure procedures, minimum IFR altitudes and how to read them on an en route chart, en route procedures and loss communications, VOR navigation, types of airspeeds and altitudes, arrival procedures, hold entries and procedures, procedure turns, all kinds of approaches, and how to read approach plates. Basically, if it's on your Checkride, it's in our document. You can take any one of the pages like we did today and conduct your own mock Checkride or have your instructor drill on it with you. You can get yours for free following the link here, in the video description, or in the comments. As always, head over to the Flight Insight website for all your flight training needs. See you there.